Chapter 26 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 26. Success under Difficulties. Victories that are easy are cheap. Those only are worth having which come as the result of hard fighting. Beecher. Little minds are tamed and subdued by misfortunes, but great minds rise above them. Washington Irving. "I have here 3 teams that I want to get over to Staten Island," said a boy of 12 one day in 1806 to the innkeeper at South Amboy, New Jersey. "If you will put us across, I'll leave with you one of my horses in pawn, and if I don't send you back $6 within 48 hours, you may keep the horse." The innkeeper asked the reason for this novel proposition, and learned that the lad's father had contracted to get the cargo of a vessel stranded near Sandy Hook and take it to New York in lighters. The boy had been sent with 3 wagons, 6 horses, and 3 men to carry the cargo across a sand spit to the lighters. The work accomplished, he had started with only $6 to travel a long distance home over the Jersey sands, and reached South Amboy penniless. "I'll do it," said the innkeeper, as he looked into the bright, honest eyes of the boy. The horse was soon redeemed. "My son," said this same boy's mother on the 1st of May, 1810, when he asked her to lend him $100 to buy a boat, having imbibed a strong liking for the sea, "on the 27th of this month you will be 16 years old. If by that time you will plow, harrow, and plant with corn the 8-acre lot, I will advance you the money." The field was rough and stony, but the work was done in time, and well done. From this small beginning, Cornelius Vanderbilt laid the foundation of a colossal fortune. In 1818, Vanderbilt owned 2 or 3 of the finest coasting schooners in New York Harbor, and had a capital of $9,000. Seeing that steam vessels would soon win supremacy over those carrying sails only, he gave up his fine business to become the captain of a steamboat at $1,000 a year. For 12 years he ran between New York City and New Brunswick, New Jersey. In 1829 he began business as a steamboat owner, in the face of opposition so bitter that he lost his last dollar. But the tide turned, and he prospered so rapidly that he at length owned over 100 steamboats. He early identified himself with the growing railroad interests of the country, and became the richest man of his day in America. Barnum began the race of business life barefoot, for at the age of 15 he was obliged to buy on credit the shoes he wore at his father's funeral. He was a remarkable example of success under difficulties. There was no keeping him down, no opposition daunted him. "Eloquence must have been born with you," said a friend to J.P. Curran. "Indeed, my dear sir, it was not," replied the orator. "It was born some 23 years and some months after me." Speaking of his first attempt at a debating club, he said, "I stood up, trembling through every fiber, but remembering that in this I was but imitating Tully, I took courage, and had actually proceeded almost as far as 'Mr. Chairman,' when, to my astonishment and terror, I perceived that every eye was turned on me. There were only 6 or 7 present, and the room could not have contained as many more. Yet was it, to my panic-stricken imagination, as if I were the central object in nature, and assembled millions were gazing upon me in breathless expectation. I became dismayed and dumb. My friends cried, 'Hear him!' but there was nothing to hear. He was nicknamed Orator Mum, and well did he deserve the title, until he ventured to stare in astonishment at a speaker who was culminating chronology by the most preposterous anachronisms. "I doubt not," said the annoyed speaker, "that Orator Mum possesses wonderful talents for eloquence, but I would remind him to show it in future by some more popular method than his silence." Stung by the taunt, Curran rose and gave the man a piece of his mind, speaking fluently in his anger. Encouraged by this success, he took great pains to become a good speaker. He corrected his habit of stuttering by reading favorite passages aloud every day, slowly and distinctly, and spoke at every opportunity. Bunyan wrote his Pilgrim's Progress on the untwisted papers which were used to cork the bottles of milk brought for his meals. Gifford wrote his first copy of a mathematical work when a cobbler's apprentice on small scraps of leather, and Rittenhouse the astronomer first calculated eclipses on his plough handle. David Livingstone at 10 years of age was put into a cotton factory near Glasgow. Out of his first week's wages he bought a Latin grammar and studied in the night schools for years. He would sit up and study till midnight, unless his mother drove him to bed. Notwithstanding, he had to be at the factory at 6 in the morning. He mastered Virgil and Horace in this way, and read extensively, besides studying botany. So eager for knowledge was he, that he would place his book before him on the spinning jenny, and amid the deafening roar of machinery would pore over its pages. All the performances of human art, at which we look with praise and wonder, says Johnson, are instances of the resistless force of perseverance. It is by this that the quarry becomes a pyramid, and that distant countries are united with canals. If a man was to compare the effect of a single stroke of the pickaxe, or of one impression of the spade, with the general design and last result, he would be overwhelmed by the sense of their disproportion. Yet those petty operations, incessantly continued, in time surmount the greatest difficulties, and mountains are leveled and oceans bounded by the slender force of human beings. Great men never wait for opportunities, they make them. Nor do they wait for facilities or favoring circumstances. They seize upon whatever is at hand, work out their problem, and master the situation. A young man determined and willing will find a way or make one. A Franklin does not require elaborate apparatus. He can bring electricity from the clouds with a common kite. Great men have found no royal road to their triumph. It is always the old route, by way of industry and perseverance. The farmer boy, Elihu B. Washburn, taught school at $10 per month, and early learned the lesson that it takes 100 cents to make $1. In after years he fought steals in Congress, until he was called the watchdog of the Treasury. When Elias Howe, harassed by want and woe, was in London completing his first sewing machine, he had frequently to borrow money to live on. He bought beans and cooked them himself. He also borrowed money to send his wife back to America. He sold his first machine for £5, although it was worth 50, and then he pawned his letters patent to pay his expenses home. The boy Arkwright begins barbering in a cellar, but dies worth $1.5 million. The world treats his novelties just as it treats everybody's novelties, made infinite objection, mustered all the impediments, but he snapped his fingers at their objections and lived to become honored and wealthy. There is scarcely a great truth or doctrine that has had to fight its way to public recognition in the face of detraction, calumny, and persecution. Nearly every great discovery or invention that has blessed mankind has had to fight its way to recognition, even against the opposition of the most progressive men. William H. Prescott was a remarkable example of what a boy with no chance can do. While at college, he lost one eye by a hard piece of bread thrown during a biscuit battle, and the other eye became almost useless. But the boy would not lead a useless life. He set his heart upon being a historian, and turned all his energies in that direction. By the aid of others' eyes, he spent 10 years studying before he even decided upon a particular theme for his first book. Then he spent 10 years more, poring over old archives and manuscripts before he published his Ferdinand and Isabella. What a lesson is his life for young men! What a rebuke to those who have thrown away their opportunities and wasted their lives! Galileo with an opera glass, said Emerson, discovered a more splendid series of celestial phenomena than anyone since with the great telescopes. Columbus found the New World in an undecked boat. Surroundings which men call unfavorable cannot prevent the unfolding of your powers. From among the rock-ribbed hills of New Hampshire sprang the greatest of American orators and statesmen, Daniel Webster. From the crowded ranks of toil and homes to which luxury is a stranger, have often come the leaders and benefactors of our race. Where shall we find an illustration more impressive than in Abraham Lincoln, whose life, career, and death might be chanted by a Greek chorus as at once the prelude and the epilogue of the most imperial theme of modern times? Born as lowly as the Son of God in a hovel, of what real parentage we know not, reared in penury, squalor, with no gleam of light, nor fair surrounding, a young manhood vexed by weird dreams and visions, with scarcely a natural grace, singularly awkward, ungainly, even among the uncouth about him. It was reserved for this remarkable character, late in life, to be snatched from obscurity, raised to supreme command at a supreme moment, and entrusted with the destiny of a nation. The great leaders of his party were made to stand aside. The most experienced and accomplished men of the day, men like Seward and Chase and Sumner, statesmen famous and trained, were sent to the rear, while this strange figure was brought by unseen hands to the front and given the reins of power. There is no open door to the temple of success. Everyone who enters makes his own door, which closes behind him to all others, not even permitting his own children to pass. Not in the brilliant salon, not in the tapestried library, not in ease and competence, is genius born and nurtured, but often in adversity and destitution, amidst the harassing cares of a straitened household, in bare and fireless garrets, amid scenes unpropitious, repulsive, wretched, have men labored, studied, and trained themselves, until they have at last emanated from the gloom of that obscurity, the shining lights of their times, have become the companions of kings, the guides and teachers of their kind, and exercised an influence upon the thought of the world amounting to a species of intellectual legislation. What does he know, said a sage, "who has not suffered." Schiller produced his greatest tragedies in the midst of physical suffering almost amounting to torture. Handel was never greater than when, warned by palsy of the approach of death, and struggling with distress and suffering, he sat down to compose the great works which have made his name immortal in music. Mozart composed his great operas, and last of all his Requiem, when oppressed by debt and struggling with a fatal disease. Beethoven produced his greatest works amidst gloomy sorrow, when oppressed by almost total deafness. Perhaps no one ever battled harder to overcome obstacles which would have disheartened most men than Demosthenes. He had such a weak voice and such an impediment in his speech, and was so short of breath that he could scarcely get through a single sentence without stopping to rest. All his first attempts were nearly drowned by the hisses, jeers, and scoffs of his audiences. His first effort that met with success was against his guardian, who had defrauded him, and whom he compelled to refund a part of his fortune. He was so discouraged by his defeats that he determined to give up forever all attempts at oratory. One of his auditors, however, believed the young man had something in him, and encouraged him to persevere. He accordingly appeared again in public, but was hissed down as before. As he withdrew, hanging his head in great confusion, a noted actor, Satyrus, encouraged him still further to try to overcome his impediment. He stammered so much that he could not pronounce some of the letters at all, and his breath would give out before he could get through a sentence. Finally, he determined to be an orator at any cost. He went to the seashore and practiced amid the roar of the breakers with small pebbles in his mouth in order to overcome his stammering, and at the same time accustom himself to the hisses and tumults of his audience. He overcame his short breath by practicing while running up steep and difficult places on the shore. His awkward gestures were also corrected by long and determined drill before a mirror. Columbus was dismissed as a fool from court after court, but he pushed his suit against an incredulous and ridiculing world. Rebuffed by kings, scorned by queens, he did not swerve a hair's breadth from the overmastering purpose which dominated his soul. The words "New World" were graven upon his heart, and reputation, ease, pleasure, position, life itself, if need be, must be sacrificed. Threats, ridicule, ostracism, storms, leaky vessels, mutiny of sailors could not shake his mighty purpose. You cannot keep a determined man from success. Place stumbling blocks in his way and he takes them for stepping stones, and on them will climb to greatness. Take away his money and he makes spurs of his poverty to urge him on. Cripple him and he writes the Waverley novels. All that is great and noble and true in the history of the world is the result of infinite, painstaking, perpetual plodding, of common everyday industry. Roger Bacon, one of the profoundest thinkers the world has produced, was terribly persecuted for his studies in natural philosophy, yet he persevered and won success. He was accused of dealing in magic, his books were burned in public, and he was kept in prison for 10 years. Even our own revered Washington was mobbed in the streets because he would not pander to the clamor of the people and reject the treaty which Mr. Jay had arranged with Great Britain. But he remained firm, and the people adopted his opinion. the Duke of Wellington was mobbed in the streets of London, and his windows were broken, while his wife lay dead in the house. But the Iron Duke never faltered in his course, or swerved a hair's breadth from his purpose. William Phillips, when a young man, heard some sailors on the street in Boston talking about a Spanish ship wrecked off the Bahama Islands, which was supposed to have money on board. Young Phillips determined to find it. He set out at once, and after many hardships, discovered the lost treasure. He then heard of another ship, which had been wrecked off Port de la Plata many years before. He set sail for England and importuned Charles II for aid. To his delight, the king fitted up the ship Rose Algier for him. He searched and searched for a long time in vain, and at length had to return to England to repair his vessel. James II was then on the throne, and Phillips had to wait for 4 years before he could raise money to return. His crew mutinied and threatened to throw him overboard, but he turned the ship's guns on them. One day an Indian diver went down for a curious sea plant, and saw several cannons lying on the bottom. They proved to belong to the wreck. He had nothing but dim traditions to guide him, but he returned to England with $1,500,000. A constant struggle, a ceaseless battle to win success in spite of every barrier, is the price of all great achievements. The man who has not fought his way up to his own loaf, and does not bear the scar of desperate conflict, does not know the highest meaning of success. The money acquired by those who have thus struggled upward to success is not their only, or indeed their chief, reward. When, after years of toil, of opposition, of ridicule, of repeated failure, Cyrus W. Field placed his hand upon the telegraph instrument, ticking a message under the sea, think you that the electric thrill passed no further than the tips of his fingers? When Thomas A. Edison demonstrated that the electric light had at last been developed into a commercial success, do you suppose those bright rays failed to illuminate the inmost recesses of his soul? End of chapter 26. Success under difficulties. Chapter 27 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 27. Uses of Obstacles. Nature, when she adds difficulties, adds brains. Emerson. Many men owe the grandeur of their lives to their tremendous difficulties. Spurgeon. The good are better made by ill, as odors crushed are sweeter still. Rogers. Though losses and crosses be lessons right severe, there's wit there you'll get there, you'll find no other where. Burns. Adversity is the prosperity of the great. Kites rise against, not with, the wind. Many and many a time since, said Harriet Martineau, referring to her father's failure in business, have we said that, but for that loss of money, we might have lived on in the ordinary provincial method of ladies with small means, sewing and economizing and growing narrower every year, whereas by being thrown, while it was yet time, on our own resources, we have worked hard and usefully, won friends, reputation, and independence, seen the world abundantly, abroad and at home. In short, have truly lived instead of vegetating. Two of the three greatest epic poets of the world were blind, Homer and Milton, while the third, Dante, was in his later years nearly, if not altogether, blind. It almost seems as though some great characters had been physically crippled in certain respects, so that they would not dissipate their energy, but concentrate it all in one direction. A distinguished investigator in science said that when he encountered an apparently insuperable obstacle, he usually found himself upon the brink of some discovery. Returned with thanks has made many an author. Failure often leads a man to success by arousing his latent energy, by firing a dormant purpose, by awakening powers which were sleeping. Men of metal turn disappointments into helps, as the oyster turns into pearl the sand which annoys it. Let the adverse breath of criticism be to you only what the blast of the storm wind is to the eagle, a force against him that lifts him higher. A kite would not fly unless it had a string tying it down. It is just so in life. The man who is tied down by half a dozen blooming responsibilities and their mother will make a higher and stronger flight than the bachelor who, having nothing to keep him steady, is always floundering in the mud. When Napoleon's school companions made sport of him on account of his humble origin and poverty, he devoted himself entirely to books, and, quickly rising above them in scholarship, commanded their respect. Soon he was regarded as the brightest ornament of the class. To make his way at the bar, said an eminent jurist, a young man must live like a hermit and work like a horse. There is nothing that does a young lawyer so much good as to be half starved. Thousands of men of great native ability have been lost to the world because they have not had to wrestle with obstacles and to struggle under difficulties sufficient to stimulate into activity their dormant powers. No effort is too dear which helps us along the line of our proper career. Poverty and obscurity of origin may impede our progress, but it is only like the obstruction of ice or debris in the river temporarily forcing the water into eddies, where it accumulates strength and a mighty reserve, which ultimately sweeps the obstruction impetuously to the sea. Poverty and obscurity are not insurmountable obstacles, but they often act as a stimulus to the naturally indolent, and develop a firmer fiber of mind, a stronger muscle and stamina of body. If the germ of the seed has to struggle to push its way up through the stones and hard sod, to fight its way up to sunlight and air, and then to wrestle with storm and tempest, with snow and frost, the fiber of its timber will be all the tougher and stronger. There is good philosophy in the injunction to love our enemies, for they are often our best friends in disguise. They tell us the truth when friends flatter. Their biting sarcasm and scathing rebuke are mirrors which reveal us to ourselves. These unkind stings and thrusts are often spurs which urge us on to grander success and nobler endeavor. Friends cover our faults and rarely rebuke. Enemies drag out to the light all our weaknesses without mercy. We dread these thrusts and exposures as we do the surgeon's knife, but are the better for them. They reach depths before untouched, and we are led to resolve to redeem ourselves from scorn and inferiority. We are the victors of our opponents. We have developed in us the very power by which we overcome them. Without their opposition we could never have braced and anchored and fortified ourselves, as the oak is braced and anchored for its 1,000 battles with the tempests. Our trials, our sorrows, and our griefs develop us in a similar way. The man who has triumphed over difficulties bears the signs of victory in his face. An air of triumph is seen in every movement. John Calvin, who made a theology for the 17th and 18th centuries, was tortured with disease for many years, and so was Robert Hall. The great men who have lifted the world to a higher level were not developed in easy circumstances, but were rocked in the cradle of difficulties and pillowed on hardships. The gods look on no grander sight than an honest man struggling with adversity. "Then I must learn to sing better," said Anaximander, when told that the very boys laughed at his singing. Strong characters, like the palm tree, seem to thrive best when most abused. Men who have stood up bravely under great misfortune for years are often unable to bear prosperity. Their good fortune takes the spring out of their energy, as the torrid zone enervates races accustomed to a vigorous climate. Some people never come to themselves until baffled, rebuffed, thwarted, defeated, crushed in the opinion of those around them. Trials unlock their virtues. Defeat is the threshold of their victory. It is defeat that turns bone to flint. It is defeat that turns gristle to muscle. It is defeat that makes men invincible. It is defeat that has made those heroic natures that are now in the ascendancy, and that has given the sweet law of liberty instead of the bitter law of oppression. Difficulties call out great qualities and make greatness possible. How many centuries of peace would have developed a Grant? Few knew Lincoln until the great weight of the war showed his character. A century of peace would never have produced a Bismarck. Perhaps Phillips and Garrison would never have been known to history had it not been for slavery. "Will he not make a great painter?" was asked in regard to an artist fresh from his Italian tour. "No, never," replied Northcote. "Why not?" "Because he has an income of £6,000 a year." In the sunshine of wealth a man is, as a rule, warped too much to become an artist of high merit. He should have some great thwarting difficulty to struggle against. A drenching shower of adversity would straighten his fibers out again. The best tools receive their temper from fire, their edge from grinding. The noblest characters are developed in a similar way. The harder the diamond, the more brilliant the luster, and the greater the friction necessary to bring it out. Only its own dust is hard enough to make this most precious stone reveal its full beauty. The spark in the flint would sleep forever but for friction. The fire in man would never blaze but for antagonism. Suddenly, with much jarring and jolting, an electric car came to a standstill just in front of a heavy truck that was headed in an opposite direction. The huge truck wheels were sliding uselessly round on the car tracks that were wet and slippery from rain. All the urging of the teamster and the straining of the horses were in vain, until the motorman quietly tossed a shovelful of sand on the track under the heavy wheels, and then the truck lumbered on its way. "Friction is a very good thing," remarked a passenger. The philosopher Kant observed that a dove, inasmuch as the only obstacle it has to overcome is the resistance of the air, might suppose that if only the air were out of the way, it could fly with greater rapidity and ease. Yet if the air were withdrawn, and the bird should try to fly in a vacuum, it would fall instantly to the ground, unable to fly at all. The very element that offers the opposition to flying is at the same time the condition of any flight whatever. Emergencies make giant men. But for our Civil War the names of its grand heroes would not be written among the greatest of our time. The effort or struggle to climb to a higher place in life has strength and dignity in it, and cannot fail to leave us stronger, even though we may never reach the position we desire or secure the prize we seek. From an aimless, idle, and useless brain, emergencies often call out powers and virtues before unknown and unsuspected. How often we see a young man develop astounding ability and energy after the death of a parent, or the loss of a fortune, or after some other calamity has knocked the props and crutches from under him. The prison has roused the slumbering fire in many a noble mind. Robinson Crusoe was written in prison. The Pilgrim's Progress appeared in Bedford jail. Sir Walter Raleigh wrote The History of the World during his imprisonment of 13 years. Luther translated the Bible while confined in the castle of Wartburg. For 20 years Dante worked in exile, and even under sentence of death. Take 2 acorns from the same tree, as nearly alike as possible. Plant one on a hill by itself, and the other in the dense forest, and watch them grow. The oak standing alone is exposed to every storm. Its roots reach out in every direction, clutching the rocks and piercing deep into the earth. Every rootlet lends itself to steady the growing giant, as if in anticipation of fierce conflict with the elements. Sometimes its upward growth seems checked for years, but all the while it has been expending its energy in pushing a root across a large rock to gain a firmer anchorage. Then it shoots proudly aloft again, prepared to defy the hurricane. The gales which sport so rudely with its wide branches find more than their match, and only serve still further to toughen every minutest fiber from pith to bark. The acorn planted in the deep forest, on the other hand, shoots up a weak, slender sapling. Shielded by its neighbors, it feels no need of spreading its roots far and wide for support. Take 2 boys as nearly alike as possible. Place one in the country, away from the hothouse culture and refinements of the city, with only the district school, the Sunday school, and a few books. Remove wealth and props of every kind, and if he has the right sort of material in him, he will thrive. Every obstacle overcome lends him strength for the next conflict. If he falls, he rises with more determination than before. Like a rubber ball, the harder the obstacle he meets, the higher he rebounds. Obstacles and opposition are but apparatus of the gymnasium in which the fibers of his manhood are developed. He compels respect and recognition from those who have ridiculed his poverty. Put the other boy in a Vanderbilt family. Give him French and German nurses. Gratify his every wish. Place him under the tutelage of great masters and send him to Harvard. Give him thousands a year for spending money, and let him travel extensively. The 2 meet. The city lad is ashamed of his country brother. The plain, threadbare clothes, hard hands, tawny face, and awkward manner of the country boy make sorrow contrast with the genteel appearance of the other. The poor boy bemoans his hard lot, regrets that he has no chance in life, and envies the city youth. He thinks that it is a cruel providence that places such a wide gulf between them. They meet again as men, but how changed! It is as easy to distinguish the sturdy, self-made man from the one who has been propped up all his life by wealth, position, and family influence, as it is for the shipbuilder to tell the difference between the plank from the rugged mountain oak and one from the sapling of the forest. When God wants to educate a man, He does not send him to school to the graces, but to the necessities. Through the pit and the dungeon, Joseph came to a throne. We are not conscious of the mighty cravings of our half-divine humanity. We are not aware of the God within us until some chasm yawns which must be filled, or till the rending asunder of our affections forces us to become conscious of a need. St. Paul in his Roman cell, John Huss led to the stake at Constance, Tyndale dying in his prison at Amsterdam, Milton amid the incipient earthquake throes of revolution, teaching two little boys in Aldgate Street, David Livingstone worn to a shadow dying in a Negro hut in Central Africa, alone. What failures they might all have seemed to themselves to be, yet what mighty purposes was God working out by their apparent humiliations. Two highwaymen, chancing once to pass a gibbet, one of them exclaimed, "What a fine profession ours would be if there were no gibbets!" "Tut, you blockhead," replied the other, "gibbets are the making of us, for if there were no gibbets everyone would be a highwayman." Just so with every art, trade, or pursuit. It is the difficulties that scare and keep out unworthy competitors. "Success grows out of struggles to overcome difficulties," says Smiles. If there were no difficulties, there would be no success. In this necessity for exertion we find the chief source of human advancement, the advancement of individuals as of nations. It has led to most of the mechanical inventions and improvements of the age. "Stick your claws into me," said Mendelssohn to his critics when entering the Birmingham Orchestra. "Don't tell me what you like, but what you don't like." John Hunter said that the art of surgery would never advance until professional men had the courage to publish their failures as well as their successes. Young men need to be taught not to expect a perfectly smooth and easy way to the objects of their endeavor or ambition, says Dr. Peabody. Seldom does one reach a position with which he has reason to be satisfied without encountering difficulties and what might seem discouragements. But if they are properly met, they are not what they seem, and may prove to be helps, not hindrances. There is no more helpful and profiting exercise than surmounting obstacles. It was in the Madrid jail that Cervantes wrote Don Quixote. He was so poor that he could not even get paper during the last of his writing, and had to write on scraps of leather. A rich Spaniard was asked to help him, but replied, "Heaven forbid that his necessities should be relieved. It is his poverty that makes the world rich." "He has the stuff in him to make a good musician," said Beethoven of Rossini. "If he had only been well flogged when a boy, but he is spoiled by the ease with which he composes." We do our best while fighting desperately to attain what the heart covets. Waters says that the struggle to obtain knowledge and to advance one's self in the world strengthens the mind, disciplines the faculties, matures the judgment, promotes self-reliance, and gives one independence of thought and force of character. Kossuth called himself a tempest-tossed soul, whose eyes have been sharpened by affliction. As soon as young eagles can fly, the old birds tumble them out and tear the down and feathers from their nest. The rude and rough experience of the eaglet fits him to become the bold king of birds, fierce and expert in pursuing his prey. Boys who are bound out, crowded out, kicked out, usually turn out, while those who do not have these disadvantages frequently fail to come out. It was not the victories, but the defeats of my life which have strengthened me, said the aged Sydenham poignant. Almost from the dawn of history, oppression has been the lot of the Hebrews, yet they have given the world its noblest songs, its wisest proverbs, its sweetest music. With them, persecution seems to bring prosperity. They thrive where others would starve. They hold the purse strings of many nations. To them, hardship has been like spring mornings, frosty but kindly, the cold of which will kill the vermin, but will let the plant live. In one of the battles of the Crimea, a cannonball struck inside the fort, crashing through a beautiful garden. But from the ugly chasm there burst forth a spring of water which ever afterward flowed a living fountain. From the ugly gashes which misfortunes and sorrows make in our hearts, perennial fountains of rich experience and new joys often spring. Don't lament and grieve over lost wealth. The Creator may see something grand and mighty, which even He cannot bring out, as long as your wealth stands in the way. You must throw away the crutches of riches and stand upon your own feet, and develop the long unused muscles of manhood. God may see a rough diamond in you which only the hard hits of poverty can polish. God knows where the richest melodies of our lives are, and what drill and what discipline are necessary to bring them out. The frost, the snows, the tempests, the lightnings are the rough teachers that bring the tiny acorn to the sturdy oak. Fierce winters are as necessary to it as long summers. It is its half-century's struggle with the elements for existence, wrestling with the storm, fighting for its life from the moment that it leaves the acorn until it goes into the ship, that gives its value. Without this struggling, it would have been characterless, stamina-less, nerveless, and its grain would have never been susceptible of high polish. The most beautiful, as well as the strongest woods, are found not in tropical climates, but in severe climates, where they have to fight the frosts and the winter's cold. Many a man has never found himself until he has lost his all. Adversity stripped him only to discover him. Obstacles, hardships, are the chisel and mallet which shape the strong life into beauty. The rough ledge on the hillside complains of the drill, of the blasting which disturbs its peace of centuries. It is not pleasant to be rent with powder, to be hammered and squared by the quarryman. But look again, behold the magnificent statue, the monument, chiseled into grace and beauty, telling its grand story of valor in the public square for centuries. The statue would have slept in the marble forever, but for the blasting, the chiseling, and the polishing. The angel of our higher and nobler selves would remain forever unknown in the rough quarries of our lives, but for the blastings of affliction, the chiseling of obstacles, and the sandpapering of 1,000 annoyances. Who has not observed the patience, the calm endurance, the sweet loveliness chiseled out of some rough life by the reversal of fortune or by some terrible affliction? How many business men have made their greatest strides toward manhood, and developed their greatest virtues when reverses of fortune have swept away everything they had in the world, when disease had robbed them of all they held dear in life? Often we cannot see the angel in the quarry of our lives, the statue of manhood, until the blasts of misfortune have rent the ledge, and difficulties and obstacles have squared and chiseled the granite blocks into grace and beauty. Many a man has been ruined into salvation. The lightning which smote his dearest hopes opened up a new rift in his dark life, and gave him glimpses of himself which, until then, he had never seen. The grave buried his dearest hopes, but uncovered in his nature possibilities of patience, endurance, and hope, which he never before dreamed he possessed. Adversity is a severe instructor, says Edmund Burke, set over us by one who knows us better than we do ourselves, as he loves us better too. He that wrestles with us strengthens our nerves and sharpens our skill. Our antagonist is our helper. This conflict with difficulty makes us acquainted with our object, and compels us to consider it in all its relations. It will not suffer us to be superficial. Men who have the right kind of material in them will assert their personality and rise in spite of 1,000 adverse circumstances. You cannot keep them down. Every obstacle seems only to add to their ability to get on. The greatest men will ever be those who have risen from the ranks. It is said that there are 10,000 chances to 1 that genius, talent, and virtue shall issue from a farmhouse rather than from a palace. Adversity exasperates fools, dejects cowards, but draws out the faculties of the wise and industrious, puts the modest to the necessity of trying their skill, awes the opulent, and makes the idle industrious. The storms of adversity, like those of the ocean, rouse the faculties and excite the invention, prudence, skill, and fortitude of the voyager. A man upon whom continuous sunshine falls is like the earth in August. He becomes parched and dry and hard and close-grained. Men have drawn from adversity the elements of greatness. Beethoven was almost totally deaf and burdened with sorrow when he produced his greatest works. Schiller wrote his best books in great bodily suffering. He was not free from pain for 15 years. Milton wrote his leading productions when blind, poor, and sick. "Who best can suffer," said he, "best can do." Bunyan said that, if it were lawful, he could even pray for greater trouble, for the greater comfort's sake. Not until the breath of the plague had blasted 100,000 lives, and the great fire had licked up cheap, shabby, wicked London, did she arise, phoenix-like, from her ashes and ruin, a grand and mighty city. True salamanders live best in the furnace of persecution. Many of our best poets are cradled into poetry by wrong, and learn in suffering what they teach in song. Byron was stung into a determination to go to the top by a scathing criticism of his first book, Hours of Idleness, published when he was but 19 years of age. Macaulay said, "There is scarce an instance in history of so sudden a rise to so dizzy an eminence as Byron reached. In a few years he stood by the side of such men as Scott, Southey, and Campbell, and died at 37, that age so fatal to genius. Many an orator, like Stuttering Jack Curran, or Orator Mum, as he was once called, has been spurred into eloquence by ridicule and abuse. This is the crutch age. Helps and aids are advertised everywhere. We have institutes, colleges, universities, teachers, books, libraries, newspapers, magazines. Our thinking is done for us. Our problems are all worked out in explanations and keys. Our boys are too often tutored through college with very little study. Short roads and abridged methods are characteristic of the century. Ingenious methods are used everywhere to get the drudgery out of the college course. Newspapers give us our politics, and preachers our religion. Self-help and self-reliance are getting old-fashioned. Nature, as if conscious of delayed blessings, has rushed to man's relief with her wondrous forces, and undertakes to do the world's drudgery and emancipate him from Eden's curse. But do not misinterpret her edict. She emancipates from the lower only to call to the higher. She does not bid the world go and play while she does the work. She emancipates the muscles only to employ the brain and heart. The most beautiful, as well as the strongest characters, are not developed in warm climates, where man finds his bread ready-made on trees, and where exertion is a great effort, but rather in a trying climate and on a stubborn soil. It is not chance that returns to the Hindu ryot a penny, and to the American laborer $1 for his daily toil, that makes Mexico with its mineral wealth poor, and New England with its granite and ice rich. It is rugged necessity. It is the struggle to obtain. It is poverty, the priceless spur that develops the stamina of manhood and calls the race out of barbarism. Intelligent labor found the world a wilderness and has made it a garden. As the sculptor thinks only of the angel imprisoned in the marble block, so nature cares only for the man or woman shut up in the human being. The sculptor cares nothing for the block as such. Nature has little regard for the mere lump of breathing clay. The sculptor will chip off all unnecessary material to set free the angel. Nature will chip and pound us remorselessly to bring out our possibilities. She will strip us of wealth, humble our pride, humiliate our ambition, let us down from the ladder of fame, will discipline us in 1,000 ways, if she can develop a little character. Everything must give way to that. The hero is not fed on sweets. Daily his own heart he eats. Chambers of the great are jails, and headwinds right for royal sails. Then welcome each rebuff that turns earth's smoothness rough, each sting that bids not sit nor stand, but go. Browning. End of chapter 27. Uses of obstacles. Chapter 28 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 28. Decision. Resolve, and thou art free. Longfellow. The heaviest charged words in our language are those briefest ones, yes and no. One stands for the surrender of the will, the other for denial. One stands for gratification, the other for character. A stout no means a stout character. The ready yes, a weak one. Gild it as we may. T. T. Munger. The world is a market where everything is marked at a set price, and whatever we buy with our time, labor, or ingenuity, whether riches, ease, fame, integrity, or knowledge, we must stand by our decision, and not like children, when we have purchased one thing, repine that we do not possess another we did not buy. Matthews. A man must master his undertaking, and not let it master him. He must have the power to decide instantly on which side he is going to make his mistakes. P. D. Armour. When Rome was besieged by the Gauls in the time of the Republic, the Romans were so hard pressed that they consented to purchase immunity with gold. They were in the act of weighing it, a legend tells us, when Camillus appeared on the scene, threw his sword into the scales in place of the ransom, and declared that the Romans should not purchase peace, but would win it with the sword. This act of daring and prompt decision so roused the Romans that they triumphantly swept from the sacred soil the enemy of their peace. In an emergency, the arrival of a prompt, decided, positive man who will do something, although it may be wrong, changes the face of everything. Such a man comes upon the scene like a refreshing breeze blown down from the mountain top. He is a tonic to the hesitating, bewildered crowd. When Antiochus Epiphanes invaded Egypt, which was then under the protection of Rome, the Romans sent an ambassador who met Antiochus near Alexandria and commanded him to withdraw. The invader gave an evasive reply. The brave Roman swept a circle around the king with his sword and forbade his crossing the line until he had given his answer. By the prompt decision of the intrepid ambassador, the invader was led to withdraw, and war was prevented. The prompt decision of the Romans won them many a battle and made them masters of the world. All the great achievements in the history of the world are the results of quick and steadfast decision. Men who have left their mark upon their century have been men of great and prompt decision. An undecided man, a man who is ever balancing between two opinions, forever debating which of two courses he will pursue, proclaims by his indecision that he cannot control himself, that he was meant to be possessed by others. He is not a man, only a satellite. The decided man, the prompt man, does not wait for favorable circumstances. He does not submit to events. Events must submit to him. The vacillating man is ever at the mercy of the opinion of the man who talked with him last. He may see the right, but he drifts toward the wrong. If he decides upon a course, he only follows it until somebody opposes it. When Julius Caesar came to the Rubicon, which formed the boundary of Italia, the sacred and inviolable, even his great decision wavered at the thought of invading a territory which no general was allowed to enter without the permission of the Senate. But his alternative was, destroy myself or destroy my country. And his intrepid mind did not waver long. The die is cast, he said, as he dashed into the stream at the head of his legions. The whole history of the world was changed by that moment's decision. The man who said, I came, I saw, I conquered, could not hesitate long. He, like Napoleon, had the power to choose one course and sacrifice every conflicting plan on the instant. When he landed with his troops in Britain, the inhabitants resolved never to surrender. Caesar's quick mind saw that he must commit his soldiers to victory or death. In order to cut off all hope of retreat, he burned all the ships which had borne them to the shores of Britain. There was no hope of return. It was victory or death. This action was the key to the character and triumphs of this great warrior. Satan's sublime decision in Paradise Lost, after his hopeless banishment from heaven, excites a feeling akin to admiration. After a few moments of terrible suspense, he resumes his invincible spirit and expresses that sublime line, "What matter where, if I be still the same?" The power to decide instantly the best course to pursue, and to sacrifice every opposing motive, and, when once sacrificed, to silence them forever, and not allow them continually to plead their claims and distract us from our single decided course, is one of the most potent forces in winning success. To hesitate is sometimes to be lost. In fact, the man who is forever twisting and turning, backing and filing, hesitating and dawdling, shuffling and parleying, weighing and balancing, splitting hairs over non-essentials, listening to every new motive which presents itself, will never accomplish anything. There is not positiveness enough in him. Negativeness never accomplishes anything. The negative man creates no confidence. He only invites distrust. But the positive man, the decided man, is a power in the world and stands for something. You can measure him, gauge him. You can estimate the work that his energy will accomplish. It is related of Alexander the Great that, when asked how it was that he had conquered the world, he replied, "By not wavering." When the packet ship Stephen Whitney struck at midnight on an Irish cliff, and clung for a few moments to the cliff, all the passengers who leaped instantly upon the rock were saved. The positive step landed them in safety. Those who lingered were swept off by the returning wave and engulfed forever. The vacillating man is never a prompt man, and without promptness no success is possible. Great opportunities not only come seldom into the most fortunate life, but also are often quickly gone. A man without decision, says John Foster, can never be said to belong to himself, since if he dared to assert that he did, the puny force of some cause, about as powerful as a spider, may make a seizure of the unhappy boaster the very next minute, and contemptuously exhibit the futility of the determination by which he was to have proved the independence of his understanding and will. He belongs to whatever can make capture of him, and one thing after another vindicates its right to him by arresting him while he is trying to go on, as twigs and chips floating near the edge of a river are intercepted by every weed and whirled into every little eddy. The decided man not only has the advantage of the time saved from dilly-dallying and procrastination, but he also saves the energy and vital force which is wasted by the perplexed man who takes up every argument on one side and then on the other, and weighs them until the two sides hang in equipoise, with no prepondering motive to enable him to decide. He is in stable equilibrium, and so does not move at all of his own volition, but moves very easily at the slightest volition of another. Yet there is not a man living who might not be a prompt and decided man, if he would only learn always to act quickly. The punctual man, the decided man, can do twice as much as the undecided and dawdling man who never quite knows what he wants. Prompt decision saved Napoleon and Grant and their armies many a time when delay would have been fatal. Napoleon used to say that although a battle might last an entire day, yet it generally turned upon a few critical minutes in which the fate of the engagement was decided. His will, which subdued nearly the whole of Europe, was as prompt and decisive in the minutest detail of command as in the greatest battle. Decision of purpose and promptness of action enabled him to astonish the world with his marvelous successes. He seemed to be everywhere at once. What he could accomplish in a day surprised all who knew him. He seemed to electrify everybody about him. His invincible energy thrilled the whole army. He could rouse to immediate and enthusiastic action the dullest troops, and inspire with courage the most stupid men. The ifs and buts, he said, are at present out of season, and above all it must be done with speed. He would sit up all night, if necessary, after riding 30 or 40 leagues, to attend to correspondence, dispatches, and details. What a lesson to dawdling, shiftless, half-hearted men! The doubt of Charles V, says Motley, changed the destinies of the civilized world. So powerful were President Washington's views in determining the actions of the people, that when Congress adjourned, Jefferson wrote to Monroe at Paris, "You will see by their proceedings the truth of what I always told you, namely, that one man outweighs them all in influence, who supports his judgment against their own and that of their representatives. Republicanism resigns the vessel to the pilot. There is no vocation or occupation which does not present many difficulties, at times almost overwhelming, and the young man who allows himself to waver every time he comes to a hard place in life will not succeed. Without decision there can be no concentration, and to succeed a man must concentrate. The undecided man cannot bring himself to a focus. He dissipates his energy, scatters his forces, and executes nothing. He cannot hold to one thing long enough to bring success out of it. One vocation or occupation presents its rosy side to him. He feels sure it is the thing he wants to do, and, full of enthusiasm, adopts it as his life's work. But in a few days the thorns begin to appear. His enthusiasm evaporates, and he wonders why he is so foolish as to think himself fitted for that vocation. The one which his friend adopted is much better suited to him. He drops his own and adopts the other. So he vacillates through life, captured by any new occupation which happens to appeal to him as the most desirable at the time, never using his judgment or common sense, but governed by his impressions and his feelings at the moment. Such people are never led by principle. You never know where to find them. They are here today and there tomorrow, doing this thing and that thing, throwing away all the skill they had acquired in mastering the drudgery of the last occupation. In fact, they never go far enough in anything to get beyond the drudgery stage to the remunerative and agreeable stage, the skillful stage. They spend their lives at the beginning of occupations which are always most agreeable. These people rarely reach the stage of competency, comfort, and contentment. There is a legend of a powerful genius who promised a lovely maiden a gift of rare value if she would go through a field of corn and, without pausing, going backward or wandering hither and thither, select the largest and ripest ear. The value of the gift was to be in proportion to the size and perfection of the ear. She passed by many magnificent ones, but was so eager to get the largest and most perfect that she kept on without plucking any until the ears she passed were successively smaller and smaller and more stunted. Finally, they became so small that she was ashamed to select one of them, and, not being allowed to go backward, she came out on the other side without any. Alexander, his heart throbbing with a great purpose, conquers the world. Hannibal, impelled by his hatred to the Romans, even crosses the Alps to compass his design. While other men are bemoaning difficulties, and shrinking from dangers and obstacles, and preparing expedients, the great soul, without fuss or noise, takes the step, and lo, the mountain has been levelled, and the way lies open. Learn, then, to will strongly and decisively. Thus fix your floating life, and leave it no longer to be carried hither and thither, like a withered leaf, by every wind that blows. An undecided man is like the turnstile at a fair, which is in everybody's way, but stops no one. The secret of the whole matter was, replied Amos Lawrence, we had formed the habit of prompt acting, thus taking the top of the tide, while the habit of some others was to delay till about half tide, thus getting on the flats. Most of the young men and women who are lost in our cities are ruined because of their inability to say no to the thousand allurements and temptations which appeal to their weak passions. If they would only show a little decision at first, one emphatic no might silence their solicitors forever. But they are weak, they are afraid of offending, they don't like to say no, and thus they throw down the gauntlet, and are soon on the broad road to ruin. A little resolution early in life will soon conquer the right to mind one's own business. An old legend says that a fool and a wise man were journeying together, and came to a point where two ways opened before them, one broad and beautiful, the other narrow and rough. The fool desired to take the pleasant way. The wise man knew that the difficult one was the shortest and safest, and so declared. But at last the urgency of the fool prevailed. They took the more inviting path, and were soon met by robbers, who seized their goods and made them captives. A little later, both they and their captors were arrested by officers of the law and taken before the judge. Then the wise man pleaded that the fool was to blame because he desired to take the wrong way. The fool pleaded that he was only a fool, and no sensible man should have heeded his counsel. The judge punished them both equally. If sinners entice thee, consent thou not. There is no habit that so grows on the soul as irresolution. Before a man knows what he has done, he has gambled his life away, and all because he has never made up his mind what he would do with it. On many of the tombstones of those who have failed in life could be read between the lines, "He dawdled," "behind time," "procrastination," "listlessness," "shiftlessness," "nervelessness," "always behind." Oh, the wrecks strewn along the shores of life, just behind success, just this side of happiness, above which the words of warning are flying. Webster said of such an undecided man that he is like the irresolution of the sea at the turn of tide. This man neither advances nor recedes. He simply hovers. Such a man is at the mercy of any chance occurrence that may overtake him. His days are lost lamenting over lost days. He has no power to seize the facts which confront him and compel them to serve him. To indolent, shiftless, listless people, life becomes a mere shuffle of expedients. They do not realize that the habit of putting everything off puts off their manhood, their capacity, their success. Their contagion infects their whole neighborhood. Scott used to caution youth against the habit of dawdling, which creeps in at every crevice of unoccupied time and often ruins a bright life. Your motto must be, he said, hoc age. Do instantly. This is the only way to check the propensity to dawdling. How many hours have been wasted dawdling in bed, turning over and dreading to get up? Many a career has been crippled by it. Burton could not overcome this habit, and, convinced that it would ruin his success, made his servant promise before he went to bed to get him up at just such a time. The servant called and coaxed, but Burton would beg him to be left a little longer. The servant, knowing that he would lose his shilling if he did not get him up, then dashed cold water into the bed between the sheets, and Burton came up with a bound. When one asked a lazy young fellow what made him lie in bed so long, "I am employed," said he, "in hearing counsel every morning. Industry advises me to get up, sloth to lie still, and they give me 20 reasons for and against. It is my part, as an impartial judge, to hear all that can be said on both sides, and by the time the cause is over, dinner is ready." There is no doubt that, as a rule, great decision of character is usually accompanied by great constitutional firmness. Men who have been noted for great firmness of character have usually been strong and robust. There is no quality of the mind which does not sympathize with bodily weakness, and especially is this true with the power of decision, which is usually impaired or weakened from physical suffering or any great physical debility. As a rule, it is the strong physical man who carries weight and conviction. Any bodily weakness or lassitude or lack of tone and vigor is perhaps first felt in the weakened or debilitated power of decisions. Nothing will give greater confidence and bring assistance more quickly from the bank or from a friend than the reputation of promptness. The world knows that the prompt man's bills and notes will be paid on the day, and will trust him. Let it be your first study to teach the world that you are not wood and straw, that there is some iron in you. Let men know that what you say you will do, that your decision, once made, is final. No wavering, that, once resolved, you are not to be allured or intimidated. Some minds are so constructed that they are bewildered and dazed whenever a responsibility is thrust upon them. They have a mortal dread of deciding anything. The very effort to come to immediate and unflinching decision starts up all sorts of doubts, difficulties, and fears, and they cannot seem to get light enough to decide, nor courage enough to attempt to remove the obstacle. They know that hesitation is fatal to enterprise, fatal to progress, fatal to success. Yet somehow they seem fated with a morbid introspection which ever holds them in suspense. They have just energy enough to weigh motives, but nothing left for the momentum of action. They analyze and analyze, deliberate, weigh, consider, ponder, but never act. How many a man can trace his downfall in life to the failure to seize his opportunity at the favorable moment, when it was within easy grasp, the nick of time which often does not present itself but once. It was said that Napoleon had an officer under him who understood the tactics of war better than his commander, but he lacked that power of rapid decision and powerful concentration which characterized the greatest military leaders perhaps of the world. There were several generals under Grant who were as well skilled in war tactics, knew the country as well, were better educated, but they lacked that power of decision which made unconditional surrender absolutely imperative wherever he met the foe. Grant's decision was like inexorable fate. There was no going behind it, no opening it up for reconsideration. It was his decision, which voiced itself in those memorable words in the wilderness. "I propose to fight it out on these lines if it takes all summer," and which sent back the words "unconditional surrender" to General Buckner, who asked him for conditions of capitulation that gave the first confidence to the North that the rebellion was doomed. At last, Lincoln had a general who had the power of decision, and the North breathed easy for the first time. The man who would forge to the front in this competitive age must be a man of prompt and determined decision. Like Caesar, he must burn his ships behind him and make retreat forever impossible. When he draws his sword, he must throw the scabbard away, lest in a moment of discouragement and irresolution he be tempted to sheathe it. He must nail his colors to the mast as Nelson did in battle, determined to sink with his ship if he cannot conquer. Prompt decision and sublime audacity have carried many a successful man over perilous crises where deliberation would have been ruin. Hoc age. End of Chapter 28. Decision. Chapter 29 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 29. Observation as a Success Factor. Henry Ward Beecher was not so foolish as to think that he could get on without systematic study and a thoroughgoing knowledge of the world of books. "When I first went to Brooklyn," he said, "men doubted whether I could sustain myself. I replied, 'Give me uninterrupted time till 9 o'clock every morning, and I do not care what comes after.'" He was a hard student during 4 hours every morning. Those who saw him after that imagined that he picked up the material for his sermons on the street. Yet, having said so much, it is true that much that was most vital in his preaching he did not pick up on the street. Where does Mr. Beecher get his sermons? Every ambitious young clergyman in the country was asking, and upon one occasion he answered, "I keep my eyes open and ask questions." This is the secret of many a man's success, keeping his eyes open and asking questions. Although Beecher was an omnivorous reader, he did not care much for the writings of the theologians. The Christ was his great model, and he knew that he did not search the writings of the Sanhedrin for his sermons, but picked them up as he walked along the banks of the Jordan and over the hills and through the meadows and villages of Galilee. He saw that the strength of this great master's sermons was in their utter simplicity, their naturalness. Beecher's sermons were very simple, healthy, and strong. They pulsated with life. They had the vigor of bright red blood in them, because, like Christ's, they grew out of doors. He got them everywhere from life and nature. He picked them up in the marketplace, on Wall Street, in the stores. He got them from the brakeman, the mechanic, the blacksmith, the day laborer, the newsboy, the train conductor, the clerk, the lawyer, the physician, and the businessman. He did not watch the progress of the great human battle from his study, as many did. He went into the thick of the fight himself. He was in the smoke and din. Where the battle of life raged fiercest, there he was, studying its great problems. Now it was the problem of slavery, again the problem of government, or commerce, or education, whatever touched the lives of men. He kept his hand upon the pulse of events. He was in the swim of things. The great, busy, ambitious world was everywhere throbbing for him. When he once got a taste of the power and helpfulness which comes from the study of real life, when he saw how much more forceful and interesting actual life stories were as they were being lived than anything he could get out of any book except the Bible, he was never again satisfied without illustrations fresh from the lives of the people he met every day. Beecher believed a sermon a failure when it does not make a great mass of hearers go away with a new determination to make a little more of themselves, to do their work a little better, to be a little more conscientious, a little more helpful, a little more determined, to do their share in the world. This great observer was not only a student of human nature, but of all nature as well. I watched him many a time, completely absorbed in drinking in the beauties of the marvelous landscape, gathering grandeur and sublimity from the great white mountains which he loved so well, and where he spent many summers. He always preached on Sunday at the hotel where he stayed, and great crowds came from every direction to hear him. There was something in his sermons that appealed to the best in everyone who heard him. They were full of pictures of beautiful landscapes, seascapes, and entrancing sunsets. The clouds, the rain, the sunshine, and the storm were reflected in them. The flowers, the fields, the brooks, the record of creation imprinted in the rocks and the mountains were intermingled with the ferry boats, the steam cars, orphans, calamities, accidents, all sorts of experiences and bits of life. Happiness and sunshine, birds and trees alternated with the direst poverty in the slums, people on sick beds and death beds, in hospitals and in funeral processions, life pictures of successes and failures, of the discouraged, the despondent, the cheerful, the optimist, and the pessimist, passed in quick succession and stamped themselves on the brains of his eager hearers. Wherever he went, Beecher continued his study of life through observation. Nothing else was half so interesting. To him, man was the greatest study in the world. To place the right values upon men, to emphasize the right thing in them, to be able to discriminate between the genuine and the false, to be able to pierce their masks and read the real man or woman behind them, he regarded as one of a clergyman's greatest accomplishments. Like Professor Agassiz, who could see wonders in the scale of a fish or a grain of sand, Beecher had an eye like the glass of a microscope, which reveals marvels of beauty in common things. He could see beauty and harmony where others saw only ugliness and discord, because he read the hidden meaning in things. Like Ruskin, he could see the marvelous philosophy, the divine plan, in the lowliest object. He could feel the divine presence in all created things. An exhaustive observation, says Herbert Spencer, is an element of all great success. There is no position in life where a trained eye cannot be made a great success asset. "Let's leave it to Osler," said the physicians at a consultation where a precious life hung by a thread. Then the great Johns Hopkins professor examined the patient. He did not ask questions. His experienced eye drew a conclusion from the slightest evidence. He watched the patient closely, his manner of breathing, the appearance of the eye. Everything was a telltale of the patient's condition, which he read as an open book. He saw symptoms which others could not see. He recommended a certain operation, which was performed, and the patient recovered. The majority of those present disagreed with him, but such was their confidence in his power to diagnose a case through symptoms and indications which escape most physicians, that they were willing to leave the whole decision to him. Professor Osler was called a living X-ray machine, with additional eyes in fingertips so familiar with the anatomy that they could detect a growth or displacement so small that it would escape ordinary notice. The power which inheres in a trained faculty of observation is priceless. The education which Beecher got through observation, by keeping his eyes, his ears, and his mind open, meant a great deal more to him and to the world than his college education. He was not a great scholar. He did not stand nearly as high in college as some of his classmates, whom he far outstripped in life, but his mind penetrated to the heart of things. Lincoln was another remarkable example of the possibilities of an education through reflection upon what he observed. His mind stopped and questioned, and extracted the meaning of everything that came within its range. Wherever he went, there was a great interrogation point before him. Everything he saw must give up its secret before he would let it go. He had a passion for knowledge. He yearned to know the meaning of things, the philosophy underlying the common everyday occurrences. Ruskin says, "Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think, but thousands can think for one who can see." I once traveled abroad with two young men, one of whom was all eyes. Nothing seemed to escape him, and the other never saw anything. The day after leaving a city, the latter could scarcely recall anything of interest, while the former had a genius for absorbing knowledge of every kind through the eye. Things so trivial that his companion did not notice them at all meant a great deal to him. He was a poor student, but he brought home rich treasures from over the sea. The other young man was comparatively rich, and brought home almost nothing of value. When visiting Luther Burbank, the wizard horticulturalist, in his famous garden recently, I was much impressed by his marvelous power of seeing things. He had observed the habits of fruits and flowers to such purpose that he has performed miracles in the fields of floriculture and horticulture. Stunted and ugly flowers and fruits, under the eye of this miracle worker, become marvels of beauty. George W. Cortelyou was a stenographer not long ago. Many people thought he would remain a stenographer, but he always kept his eyes open. He was after an opportunity. Promotion was always staring him in the face. He was always looking for the next step above him. He was a shrewd observer. But for this power of seeing things quickly, of absorbing knowledge, he would never have advanced. The youth who would get on must keep his eyes open, his ears open, his mind open. He must be quick, alert, ready. I know a young Turk who has been in this country only a year, yet he speaks our language fluently. He has studied the map of our country. He knows its geography and a great deal of our history, and much about our resources and opportunities. He said that when he landed in New York, it seemed to him that he saw more opportunities in walking every block of our streets than he had ever seen in the whole of Turkey. And he could not understand the lethargy, the lack of ambition, the indifference of our young men to our marvelous possibilities. The efficient man is always growing. He is always accumulating knowledge of every kind. He does not merely look with his eyes, he sees with them. He keeps his ears open. He keeps his mind open to all that is new and fresh and helpful. The majority of people do not see things. They just look at them. The power of keen observation is indicative of a superior mentality, for it is the mind, not the optic nerve, that really sees. Most people are too lazy, mentally, to see things carefully. Close observation is a powerful mental process. The mind is all the time working over the material which the eye brings it, considering, forming opinions, estimating, weighing, balancing, calculating. Careless, indifferent observation does not go back of the eye. If the mind is not focused, the image is not clean cut, and is not carried with force and distinctness enough to the brain to enable it to get at the truth and to draw accurate conclusions. The observing faculty is particularly susceptible to culture, and is capable of becoming a mighty power. Few people realize what a tremendous success and happiness is possible through the medium of the eye. The telegraph, the sewing machine, the telephone, the telescope, the miracles of electricity, in fact, every great invention of the past or present, every triumph of modern labor-saving machinery, every discovery in science and art is due to the trained power of seeing things. The whole secret of a richly stored mind is alertness, sharp, keen attention, and thoughtfulness. Indifference, apathy, mental lassitude, and laziness are fatal to all effective observation. It does not take long to develop a habit of attention that seizes the salient points of things. It is a splendid drill for children to send them out on the street or out of doors anywhere, just for the purpose of finding out how many things they can see at a certain given time, and how closely they can observe them. Just the effort to try to see how much they can remember and bring back is a splendid drill. Children often become passionately fond of this exercise, and it becomes of inestimable value in their lives. Other things equal, it is the keen observer who gets ahead. Go into a place of business with the eye of an eagle. Let nothing escape you. Ask yourself why it is that the proprietor at 50 or 60 years of age is conducting a business which a boy of 18 or 20 ought to be able to handle better. Study his employees, analyze the situation. You will find perhaps that he never knew the value of good manners in clerks. He thought a boy, if honest, would make a good salesman, but perhaps by gruff, uncouth manners, he is driving out of the door customers the proprietor is trying to bring in by advertisements. You will see by his show windows, perhaps, before you go into his store, that there is no business insight, no detection of the wants of possible buyers. If you keep your eyes open, you can, in a little while, find out why this man is not a greater success. You can see that a little more knowledge of human nature would have revolutionized his whole business, multiplied his receipts tenfold in a few years. You will see that this man has not studied men. He does not know them. No matter where you go, study the situation. Think why the man does not do better if he is not doing well, why he remains in mediocrity all his life. If he is making a remarkable success, try to find out why. Keep your eyes open, your ears open. Make deductions from what you see and hear. Trace difficulties. Look up evidences of success or failure everywhere. It will be one of the greatest factors in your own success. End of chapter 29. Observation as a success factor.